Layoffs aren't always obvious, even though most people probably think they are and assume they would be. Seems simple. You lose your job, you get a severance package, and you move on. But some of the most expensive exits don't look like layoffs at all. They're framed as new, exciting career opportunities. There's a shift in how companies are managing exits. It used to be straightforward. You get laid off, you get a package, and that's it. Clean, obvious, direct, and expensive for the employer. Now it's much less obvious. Instead of removing roles outright, companies are now restructuring. Titles change, scope changes, compensation shifts or not. Role doesn't disappear, but it does change. It's not the same anymore. And here's the part that most people actually miss. Under Canadian employment law, this is constructive dismissal. A significant change to your role, your pay, can be seen as a termination. So even if no one actually says the words, you're being let go, you're fired, you're terminated, this isn't about conspiracy, or is it? Maybe it is. Anyway, layoffs are expensive. Severance, pay continuation, benefits, potential like brand exposure. Restructuring, well, that's gonna shift how those costs show up. Instead of a direct exit, the situation becomes a lot more unstable. Role changes, expectations shift, and then ultimately the employee has to decide whether to stay or to go. And when someone leaves on their own, well, the employer doesn't necessarily have to pay a thing. So this is a pretty great deal for them. Now, I'm not saying that all companies do this intentionally, but isn't that where the incentive points? It all happens in how the role change is communicated to the employee. You won't hear this role is being phased out or we're demoting you. Instead, you'll hear we're realigning the team. This is a strategic shift. Side note, you did a version of this role 5 years ago. And sometimes all those things are totally true, but they end up actually masking what's actually going on. The company, well, they know the full picture, but the employee often doesn't. So as a result, you're ending up making decisions without access to the full picture. This is exactly where most people end up making the wrong move. They treat the situation like feedback, personal development, but it's actually a key leverage moment. In Canada, if your employer makes big unilateral change to your role, this is called constructive dismissal. And it's not actually legal. But here's the catch. If you just sit quietly and accept those new conditions, well, you've essentially entered into a new deal with your employer, and you might not have actually even realized it. Silence and inaction can actually become agreement to the new employment terms. That's why everything from your employer's end is probably going to feel urgent. Let's make things happen quickly because it's an emotional time. And if you're acting quickly, you might not pause and think about what's actually happening or see this true story of constructive dismissal. And constructive dismissal, well, it's kind of messy. Canadian Industrial Relations Board actually reports that 78% of constructive dismissal claims are settled outside of litigation. So that tells us employers typically don't want to go to court for this type of stuff. It's messy and it's gross for the employment brand. These deals, they get negotiated quietly and behind the scenes. In reality, when roles change like this, or if we're demoted, we're embarrassed and feeling down on ourselves. So we often just accept it and try to make the best of the situation. People try to adapt, try to hope things stabilize, and maybe the next time around, it'll be the big opportunity for that promotion. In many cases, the system, your employer has already revalued you, and your stock price, it just plummeted. So something like this is going to be really difficult to reverse internally. You've essentially got three options. One, you stay and you try to rebuild. Two, you leave and try to quickly move on. Or three, you treat this as a negotiation moment. Option one can work, but often slows down your overall career. The second option is clean, but you're leaving money and leverage on the table. And option 3 is really uncomfortable, but often the most valuable. Because if your role has fundamentally changed, the question is not, how do I succeed here? It's, what is this situation actually worth? Because the biggest mistake that people tend to make isn't getting laid off, it's giving away their leverage. I'm not a lawyer. Maybe that's why you should listen to me. But I have been involved in hundreds of conversations around severance from both the side of HR and from the side of the employee, writing them, reviewing them, and helping employees respond. And I can tell you this for sure. People don't struggle because they're not capable. They struggle because the whole situation is extremely messy and extremely unclear, and they just don't know where to start. You're often asked to make decisions really quickly and with limited information. You want to be easy to work with. You're also trying to protect your reputation and your next move. So instead of guessing, if you've been forced into a new role that's feeling like a demotion and you're thinking, hey, maybe this is constructive dismissal, you've got to respond in a structured way. It gives you a starting point for this situation. How to respond professionally and how to negotiate in a way that's not going to hurt your chances of getting a fair package or damage your career. First reply you send to this new proposition from your employer can change the entire outcome. If you're in that position, it's linked in the description. Now, this isn't about assuming bad or ill intent. It's about understanding how the system works. Organizations make decisions based on cost and priorities. And those decisions don't always show up clearly at the individual level. But the impact is real and the impact is emotional. If your role changes significantly, don't rush to respond. Pause, assess, understand your position before you do anything. Because if you move too quickly, that's usually when your leverage is gone. And most people don't realize that until it's much too late. That's how work really works.